You're a factor in this, you personally. Why do you think people don't like you?
Wow! Wow, that came out of left field.
Oh my God.
Okay, that shocked the crap out of me.
Wow! Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. Trudeau may have just had his worst interview of the year, and we're only in April. He appeared on a CBC podcast called The Current, so you won't be subjected to watching him speak, but you will need to listen to him squirm as CBC host Matt Galloway uses terms like dumpster fire to describe his carbon tax policy.
Let's take a look, or rather, a listen.
Back to The Current.
Good to be back, Matt.
Glad to have you here. It feels a bit like an election campaign. You're zipping across the country here and there, announcing things with big dollar signs attached to them.
Well, we got a big budget coming out, and it's one that's focused on the fact that far too many young people, particularly millennials and Gen Z, don't feel like the system works for them anymore. Even if they have a great job, they are squeezed on housing, they're squeezed on rent, they can't save up for buying a home, they're pressed on groceries, they're seeing a world where climate change is getting worse and worse, they're worried about their future, and government has a role in making sure that there is fairness for them.
Okay, so we're not even a minute in. And
he's already saying some of the most ridiculous stuff I've heard yet.
Well, some of the ridiculous things that he's saying is everything that Pierre has been saying for the last 2 years.
But a lot of these things that he's saying, that Trudeau is saying, he caused them.
Oh,
His
yeah.
government caused them. I mean, millennials can't afford homes because you've brought so many people into the country without increasing this housing supply that people have nowhere to live.
Well, and they printed $600 billion of new currency that just funneled right in to the Canadian economy and the world economy. And gee, I wonder what that would do. Oh, yes, that would cause hyperinflation. So you did this. And then he says, climate change is getting worse. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, so what about all of these supposed environmental policies that the Liberals have put in since 2015? It's almost as if whatever you're doing, you're not working. Yeah, it's almost as if they don't work. So great job, Trudeau. Okay, so what you've essentially stated in the first 60 seconds is you've done a terrible job at being a prime minister, and your government and your cabinet has done a terrible job at running this country since 2015.
Well, to be fair, they have run it into the ground.
Right, but it's just interesting hearing him, in a way, admit it.
Let me talk about that in a minute. I want to begin with the news of the week in some ways, which is still the carbon tax. No matter what else you seem to speak about, people are focused on the price on carbon. We have seen an increase up to, $80 per ton this week. A liter of gas now costs 3 cents more. Do you think you've made a convincing case to Canadians that that increase is a good thing?
Well, I think we can put the case aside for a second and let's talk about the actual policy.
The case matters because people are protesting, wondering whether this actually works. Of
course, the case matters, but let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. We designed a price on pollution in this country that gives more money back to average Canadians, to 8 out of 10 Canadian families, particularly middle-income and low-income people. So we're not only fighting climate change, we're putting more money in the pockets of folks who need it through the Canada Carbon Rebate.
Groan is he still using that line. Oh, well, more people get money back, blah, 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 blah. Your own budget officer said that is false.
I just have one thing to say. Here's the chart. There's the chart. No more chart.
That's the framework we built with all premiers working together back in 2016.
Do you think you've made that case?
I think we're continuing to make that case. It's understandable that at a time of anxiety, of pressure on costs, of affordability concerns, that some politicians are trying to drum up support for themselves by scaring people and by giving misinformation. It's unfortunate, but we're going to continue telling the truth, which is 8 out of 10 families do better off because we put a price on pollution.
So just to be clear, you don't think you've lost the narrative on this? We had a conversation this week with somebody who's a defender of the carbon tax. He talked about it as a dumpster fire in terms of how it's rolled out. You don't think you've lost the narrative on this?
Oh, wow.
I love that he says that literally to Trudeau's face. Like, because remember, Trudeau's in studio with this guy, so they're sitting across the table from each other. So this guy's just looking at him saying, yeah, we had somebody in here this last week that likes the carbon tax and said that your rollout was a freaking dumpster fire. What do you have to say to that, Trudeau? But here's the other thing that it's funny because Trudeau just said, well, there's some politicians, this is him projecting again, everybody. There's some politicians that, they're telling lies and they're trying to just drum up support for themselves and yada, yada, yada. Well, you just opened this interview by basically saying all of the stuff that you're trying to put into this budget is to target young people. The base that you had in 2015 that you've completely lost the plot on.
We totally let them down.
And now they are all moving over to the Conservatives because the Conservatives actually have a reasonable approach and believable plan to right the ship.
Well, and this is the thing about this whole carbon tax situation. One could argue that, it is important to reduce our carbon footprint, the environment's important, et cetera, et cetera. Suppose we make that argument. Okay. Now, you cannot argue that it is acceptable to put people into poverty to protect the environment or whatever you happen to believe on that front. I mean, you can't argue that the environment is more important than the people in that environment. Like, that's why this makes no sense to me.
And even if you do, Canada is not in a position to change the global climate system.
Well, and that's another point, is that they're trying to apply a federal tax to a global problem.
Right. And
it's not going to work.
It's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous.
Well, I think what we've actually done in the policy, it is helping Canadians. Now, the fact that Conservative premiers or the Conservative leader of the opposition wants to take away those supports for Canadians, that's something that people need to hear. And that's not something that they're talking about. So we're continuing to talk about the fact that they have no plan to fight climate change and no plan to keep supporting people with affordability.
Of course, it's not just Conservative premiers, though. It's Wab Kinew in Manitoba. It's a fellow Liberal in Andrew Furey in Newfoundland and Labrador. What would it take for them to convince you that this is not the right policy?
Well, they have the opportunity to put forward a pricing frame that makes sure that pollution isn't free at the same level for the rest of the country, but in a way that works for their province if they don't want to have the federal backstop.
It's so ridiculous. So the question is what would it take to convince you that the carbon tax is not the right approach? And essentially what Trudeau has said in his answer is, I will not be convinced by anybody that this isn't the approach that we should be taking.
Well, because he's a flaming narcissist. I mean,
yeah.
He thinks he is the only one that understands this, and all the rest of us idiots we're not enlightened enough. We don't understand his master plan.
Right. And the thing is that he has said, well, if they don't want a carbon tax, then they have to propose a carbon tax. That's what he's saying.
Not only that, but they have to propose a price on pollution that's at least equal to the federal one.
Which is a carbon tax.
What it sounded like. Yeah. No, but I mean, like, in terms of dollar value or in terms of like price per ton of carbon, what have you. It's ridiculous. Like, maybe I don't know, in Saskatchewan, you can say, okay, well, on average, our people only emit this much carbon, so we want it less. Like, I don't know. I don't think that there should be a price on carbon at all, because, again, you're trying to solve a global problem with a federal tax. You're punishing the people of Canada for the entire world's carbon emissions.
Well, and here's the thing, right? If you're trying to approach this from a operant conditioning approach, which is essentially you reward good behavior and you punish bad behavior, this has completely lost the plot, because you can have Canadians, and I think most Canadians are like this, they use their car when they need to go to work, to go and get groceries, to go and visit family and friends. The vast majority of people don't, get in their car and just run around and burn gas just because, right? You know, that you don't have people that are using their gas furnace all summer long because, you know, they actually care about, you know, what they spend. So you have people that are being responsible with how they spend their dollars and therefore being responsible with how they quote unquote pollute, but you're punishing them anyway. So what's the good behavior? He's trying to say, well, we're putting more money back into their product, which we have shown that they're not. So there is literally no upside here. So you are surprised that Canadians are getting pissed off at the carbon tax when you are literally offering no relief to the vast majority of Canadians that are trying to actually live responsibly in this country that, I'm sorry, you have to use fossil fuels to get around. It's a fact.
Well, and that's the thing. This isn't a luxury tax. Like, this isn't a tax on cigarettes or a tax on alcohol. You can live a perfectly normal life without those things. One might even argue you can live a healthier life without those things. With the carbon, you need to get to work. You need to go buy groceries. You need to go visit the doctor. Like, these are essentials.
You live in Canada, you need to heat your home in the winter.
That as well. But, I mean, how can you say that, oh, well, people, if they just alter their behavior, people are already doing the bare minimum to get by in terms of, you know, like frivolous spending in terms of they're not going on Sunday drives. They're not going to the fancy grocery store across town. They're just going to the regular one across the street.
They're not buying things from small businesses, which is causing small businesses to fail because there's no disposable income.
Right. So how can you alter a behavior when the behavior that you're currently exhibiting is necessary? Right.
So this is why everyone is against the carbon tax.
Indeed, a number of provinces started with that. BC and Quebec still have it. Ontario actually only has the carbon tax because Doug Ford got rid of the cap and trade system. So as he rails against the price on pollution and the rebate we're giving to Ontario, he's actually responsible directly for it because he scrapped the Made in Ontario pricing plan they had.
So Andrew Furey has said that he wants a meeting with you to talk about this. He wants the premiers to come together with you. Will you have that meeting?
I had a meeting in 2016 with all premiers.
Will you have the meeting now with?
I will continue to talk with premiers, but I will continue to be pressing Andrew and all others on the actual facts that we have a plan to fight climate change that puts more money back in the pockets of Canadians that need it. And any premier or any conservative, leader of the opposition, that wants to take away those checks that are helping 8 out of 10 families right across the country is going to have to explain that both to me and to Canadians.
Well, first of all, if the Conservatives scrap the carbon tax, which they have said they will, yeah, we won't get rebates, but we also won't be losing that money in the first place. So, like, that's a moot point. We'll be actually saving money in the long run. Number two, I find it very interesting how the interviewer asked Trudeau, oh, well, will you be meeting with the premiers? And he was like, well, I met with them in 2016. Dude, that was what, 8 years ago?
Yep.
So as somebody who has employees, and if they were upset about a particular policy or something that you were trying to implement, and they said, you know, we want a meeting with you, would you just be like, well, I met with you 8 years ago, you know, that's too bad, you better just toe the line and do what I want? Like, what would you do if your employees en masse came to you and said, we need to talk?
It'd probably be a good idea to meet with them.
Right. So why is Trudeau brushing this off?
Well, see, this sounds like an abusive relationship to me, because you have a situation where Trudeau is saying, well, it's not my fault that Ontario has a carbon tax. It's Doug Ford's fault. He took out the cap and trade system and he didn't replace it with anything. So it's actually Doug Ford's fault that Ontario has a carbon tax. This sounds like, you know, it's not my fault I had to hit you.
Yeah, it sounds really bad.
You made me angry, so I had to hit you. You asked for it.
Yep, I know what's best for you.
Don't do it again.
Yep.
That's what this sounds like.
100%.
One of the reasons why there's great anxiety over this is because, as you've said, there are a lot of people who feel like the system is stacked against them. Young people in particular, they do everything they can. They get a good job. They're working hard. They can't square that circle. You've had 9 years in power. To what extent is your government responsible for the fact that that system is stacked against them?
Wow.
Good question coming from the CBC. That's shocking.
Very, very good question.
Do you think that they're trying to cozy up to the Conservatives because they see that JT's on the downslope?
I just hope that there's like pockets of people in the CBC that hate that, you know, their overlords are in the pocket of the PMO, and I just, you know, there's some part of me that hopes that there's this, like, these pockets of resistance in the CBC that when they get a chance, they take it. I'm hoping this is one of those cases.
We got elected in 2015 focused on supporting the middle class, and we brought in a number of measures that made a huge difference. We cut child poverty in half in this country with the Canada Child Benefit. But particularly since the pandemic, we've seen things get so much more difficult for so many people, particularly the young people who've been my motivation since I got into politics 15 years ago. So investing in them, supporting them as renters, making sure there's a pathway for them to buy a home, making sure that they're confident that the world's not going to be on fire when they're adults and raising their own kids, so we fight climate change. These things matter.
Yeah, you've done such a stellar job at lifting people out of the middle class that the middle class barely even exists anymore.
Right. There's like the super ultra rich, like JT and Freeland, and then there's everybody else.
And we keep hearing Freeland and Justin Trudeau talk about how many kids that they've lifted out of poverty and how the poverty rate has fallen. Well, here's the interesting thing is they only talk about statistics as it relates to them giving CERB out to people.
Right. There's an article here from the National Post that was dated this past February 2024. And here's a quick excerpt. It says, in reality, since 2021, the number of children living in monetary poverty has sharply risen from 15.2% in 2020 to 17.8% in 2021, and more than 1 million Canadian children live in poverty today. That means 1 in 5 children live in persistent fear and stress, face barriers to having their basic needs met, such as a stable housing and nutritious food, and experience a lack of opportunity, including access to quality early childhood experiences. As a child psychologist and a health economist, we know that the consequences of child poverty are lifelong and are worth prioritizing.
So just some quick math, that's 20% of all kids are living in poverty.
It is. And it's disgusting to me that Trudeau is saying, oh, we lifted all these kids out of poverty, not mentioning the other half, which is now they've slammed dunked all those children plus many more back into poverty.
Right. It is so disingenuous, but, you know, let's not get facts get in the way of reality here, right?
Do you take any responsibility? Does your government take any responsibility for the fact that people feel like the system is working against them, that they can't get ahead?
I think ultimately the government is responsible for many, many things, good things and bad, and we wear that. And what we need to continue to do is respond to the pressures of the moment. What we've seen over the past few years is those pressures have increased everywhere around the world. And what Canada has done around reducing childcare fees, saving thousands of dollars a month for families across the country, coming forward just a few days ago with increases to a national school food program that is going to make a huge difference. And as a teacher, I know how much of a difference that makes. Accelerating the investments in housing, protections for renters, so that a young person who's paying $2,000 in rent every single month diligently gets no credit for that, no kudos for that in their credit score. We should change that so that banks can look at them and say, oh, you are a reliable investment. We'll give you a mortgage so you can buy a home as they become more affordable, as we increase supply. We are busy working on that. And yes, there's things that we could have done more of early on had we known how bad this was going to be. We're doing it now and we're accelerating.
Had you known how bad it was going to be? I mean, there are a lot of these issues that have been hanging around for a long time. It has not been easy to buy a home, for example, in many parts of this country for years, not even at the pandemic, but long before that. Why didn't your government take more aggressive? Why didn't your government take more aggressive action on that earlier?
Well, let's take an example. In 2017, 2% of our population were temporary immigrants, that is, temporary workers or foreign students. Right now, it's 7.5% of our population. That has caused millions of people here in this country putting pressure on a system beyond our regular immigration levels. That has put pressure on housing, that has put pressure on the system in all ways.
I gotta love it. So he's acknowledging that foreign people coming into this country are causing a problem. But what he's trying to do, because he has said this in other interviews, what he's trying to do is lay this at the province's feet.
Oh, of course, he's trying to download all the problems caused by the federal government, i.e. Trudeau's government, onto the provinces. Because,
like, he's saying, well, you know, our temporary residents here have increased by almost a factor of 3. And, oh, that's the provinces, and they're not managing that, and yada, yada, yada. Which is interesting because the province has no jurisdiction on the border. They have no jurisdiction on the border. That's a federal mandate. And the other thing is that, okay, so if you saw that, then why didn't you address it? Why did you continue to increase your yearly immigration program? Why did you do that? But, you know, he's not going to talk about that, is he? Because that would be him taking responsibility for now housing minister, but then immigration minister Sean Fraser's complete ineptitude.
Well, and StatsCan just released its unemployment rate for March 2024. It's up 0.3 points to 6.1%. And that's blamed largely on 2 things. The first being a stall in the job market, so not many new jobs are being created. And number 2 is all the new people coming into this country.
Right. Because, you know, at some point, there's not going to be enough jobs to go around. And 2, you're going to have all these people coming in looking for jobs. So when you have a simultaneous issue of the middle class dying, which means small businesses are going to die, which means those jobs are going to disappear, and you bring in more and more and more people into this country, this is a recipe for disaster. And this was foretold to Trudeau before the pandemic.
Well, listen to these numbers. This is from a Globe and Mail article. The country lost a net 2,200 jobs last month, meaning March 2024. Statistics Canada said Friday, undershooting analyst expectations of 25,000 positions added. The unemployment rate rose to 6.1% from 5.8% in February, and it has risen by a full percentage point over the past year. The unemployment rate was driven higher in March by an increase of 60,000 people searching for work or on temporary layoff, StatsCan said. And listen to this part. The Canadian numbers offered a stark contrast to the United States, which on Friday reported a gain of 303,000 jobs in March.
This is something we're doing to reduce that number down to 5% over the coming year because we know that is something we can do. Now, nobody could have predicted the pandemic. What we did during the pandemic was there to support people to get it through.
People probably could have predicted that the number of temporary migrants coming to this country, I mean, if they were being tracked, that was happening. The announcement that you're going to, take it back under control, as you said earlier this week, is something that's only happening now. That's why people are wondering, I guess, why that more aggressive action wasn't taken earlier.
Love it. I love the accountability that this guy is putting at Trudeau's feet.
That was incredible. Are we sure this is CBC?
Yes, it's CBC.
Oh my goodness.
This is not National Post. This is not Toronto Sun.
This is not Northern Perspective.
Yeah. Well, it sort of is. But like he's basically saying, dude, we knew what the number of temporary people was going to be here because you track it. Are you saying you weren't tracking it? Why weren't you tracking it if that was the case? Like, you can't get away with this. And again, borders, immigration, federal responsibility. Cough, cough, Sean Fraser.
Well, for example, aggressive action on on international students was something we had to do because provinces and institutions had exploded the numbers so rapidly that the federal government had to say, no, we're going to limit the number of international students because it's putting too many pressures on neighborhoods around. Now, that's something that, yes, the federal government is part of, but it's provinces that are the ones managing this that hadn't been willing to actually do their job, so we had to step in. So, yes, all of us working together need to be solving these things, and that's what I'm going to stay focused on.
Are you serious? You're blaming the provinces. The provinces do not issue visas. I mean, the colleges, the universities, they can scream that they want more international students all they want, but it is up to your administration, Mr. Trudeau, to actually create those visas and let students into this country. If you guys say, no way, it's not happening, and those universities and colleges can continue to scream their heads off, it doesn't matter.
Right, and where is your quote-unquote collaboration with the provinces where you say, listen, guys, we have an upcoming immigration plan to bring in this many people. That's going to be a problem if you go from 2% to 7% in terms of the temporary people that are coming here, including foreign students. So we need to come to some sort of arrangement on here so we don't crush the system. But you know what? Nobody talked to anybody. Nobody tracked this. Nobody looked at this. This is just complete, utter negligence of the immigration program, the immigration system, and the international student program by all involved.
Well, and look at the government, the federal government wasn't even checking admission papers properly. There was a whole bunch of students in India, I believe,
that came over fraudulently and they didn't even know it.
Right. And the government, I don't actually know if they ended up sending them back home or if they let them stay in Canada, because there was talk of letting them stay.
Well, I believe this goes into the 1 million people that Sean Fraser lost. His Department of Immigration lost 1 million people. As Pierre says,
can the minister please tell us, glasses, binoculars, or otherwise, how you lose 1 million people?
The end result of that is that there are a lot of young people in particular who voted for you in 2015 who have left the party, who are now openly talking about voting Conservative. What do you say to them? What do you say to those people who feel like you let them down?
I think about those young people a lot.
What do you say to them?
I think about the people who voted for me for the very first time they ever voted in 2015 and who are now in their mid to late 20s and struggling. And that's why we're putting forward a focus on building for them, on making sure that their success is at the center of what we do, of restoring fairness for them in a system that, yes, has increasingly gotten stacked against them, not just in Canada, but around the world. So that's where standing up for renters' rights, making sure we're building more supply of homes, making sure we're cutting childcare fees in half on the way down to $10 a day for those young families, making sure we're moving forward on a national food school program, making sure we're expanding the infrastructure builds that are going to build better public transit so people can live closer to the worlds they live in, the place they work. Moving forward on better competition in grocery and transparency in grocery prices so that we can stabilize those prices. There's a lot of these different things to do at the same time as we're fighting climate change and building in the kinds of investments for the future. These are things that you can either sit back and say, okay, let me amplify the anger of young people, or let me solve it. And I'm focused on solving it.
But you're not solving it.
no.
You're coming up with stupid, frivolous ideas that barely even scratch the surface. Look at this quote unquote rent control thing that they're doing. Okay, so they're trying to make it so that landlords have to report you paying your rent on time to the credit bureau. Okay, but the fact that young people don't have credit is not what's blocking them from getting a home. It's the outrageous home prices. So even if you do create this rental reporting thing, then young people still aren't going to be able to buy homes because the prices are just astronomical.
Right. The problem is he's trying to put in a lot of smoke and mirrors solutions that don't actually do anything. So to Fox's point, you can have perfect credit, but you're still paying $3,500 a month in rent. You can have perfect credit and you're still not able to save in this, home buyers tax-free savings account that 300,000 people have opened. Yeah, but there's nothing in it. Why? Because they can't afford it. Over 50% of Canadians, and this is a couple of years ago, folks, over 50% of Canadians are spending 110% of their paycheck.
So what does that mean? It means it goes on credit.
So, and again, we've had conversations with people at the bank, and what they are seeing increasingly more common is people coming in to try to open a line of credit to pay bills because they can't afford it.
Now, Trudeau thinks that big government should be able to help Canadians out with this. But you know what that means? That means that we're going to get charged even more in taxes. How about you cut the taxes that we're paying and Canadians will be able to fend for themselves, the way nature intended?
Well, and, saying big government, remember, Trudeau said big budget. That should scare a lot of Canadians, especially home buyers.
It absolutely should. And I really, really hope that the NDP actually stand up for Canadians this time and vote against this upcoming budget.
Because if this budget is an over $500 billion budget, this will be disastrous for interest rates, because the Bank of Canada will have no choice but to raise interest rates again. And this default crisis, which at the current rate, it's coming, it is going to get so much worse. So everyone should be watching what is tabled on April 16th very, very closely. You can bet we will.
For people, again, who felt like you were the one who was going to answer those questions, and they don't see those questions answered, and they see Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, sure, understanding that anger, tapping into that anger, what do you say to them who have left you to go to his party?
Well, right now, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives have exactly zero solutions to propose for any of these challenges. They are not putting forward an alternative. They are recognizing and amplifying the frustration and anger people are feeling. But they are not providing solutions in any way, shape, or form. For climate change, for affordability, he's right now blocking the doubling of the rural top-up that helps, I was going to say it's conservative, but rural Canadians across the country with a 20% increase, 20% top-up on the Canada carbon rebate. They're blocking it in the House because of ideology. They're blocking money from going to people in rural communities who often vote for them because of their opposition and their desire to play politics. Yeah, their opposition to a price on pollution that fights climate change and puts more money in people's pockets. So I'm going to focus on delivering for people. That's what I got elected for. That's the commitment I made. And we took a very different choice in 2015 than the United States did in responding to the challenges the middle class is facing.
Yeah, you took a very different choice. And what's the difference? Well, the United States, their rent and their housing costs are half of what ours are.
And as I just read, they've added over 303,000 jobs to their economy this past month. How many did Canada add? Less than 25,000. And yeah, we've got a tenth of their population, but our numbers aren't even a tenth of what theirs were.
Right. So, this is what it is. And he's been asked twice to provide an olive branch to the people that have crossed the party line, that have said, screw you, Trudeau, I'm going to go and vote for the Conservatives because it sounds like they actually have a plan. And then Trudeau comes out with the audacity of saying, well, they don't have a plan to address any of these issues. Have you heard him speak? They absolutely do.
Well, and the other thing, the Conservatives aren't going to give you their rule book right now. I mean, an election hasn't been called. They're not going to tell you absolutely everything that they're going to be doing. That would be stupid because you guys would criticize half the things and steal the other half.
And here's the other thing. You don't think that the Prime Minister that is going to be coming in after you, Trudeau, doesn't want to have a plan to fix this country? Because, when they do, what is going to happen is, assuming that they are actually successful in righting the ship, they could go down in history as one of the greatest prime ministers in Canadian history, because of the mess that you have created in this country, the division that you've sown between families, between friends, between co-workers, between communities, the amount of communities you've destroyed and created tent cities across this country that never existed before. He is so quick when it comes to all of the negative things that have gone on to blame the provinces, to blame the world, to blame everything else. Yet he says, well, we wear that. I haven't heard you wear it once. You blamed everybody else. But then whenever there's anything quote unquote good that happens, it's because of his party. So, no, you wear the good with the bad.
They voted for a populist in Donald Trump, but Canadians voted for someone who's going to roll up their sleeves and deliver. And it is harder than ever before to do that. And that's why we're putting forward such an ambitious plan right now to change the equation for young people and for every generation.
Do you think people are still listening to you, or have they tuned you out?
I think Canadians remain open-minded and ambitious about their future. People are hurting, people are worried, but when comes time to actually work for your community, work to build a better future, Canadians roll up their sleeves. And that's what they expect from their politicians as well. That's what we're doing. And I look forward to the chance to talk with Canadians about that over the next year and a half. And in the next election, Canadians will have a really important choice to make about what kind of country we are.
I swear, over the next year and a half, at one point, Fox and I are going to go to one of Trudeau's rallies.
Does Trudeau even do rallies, or does he only do cash for access? Because I am not giving the Liberal Party any money.
I'm not giving him any money. We've already given him enough money over the last 8 years.
Right.
So, well, you know what? We'll see.
No.
Well, we'll see if he does do a rally. We're not paying to get in.
He won't.
He
only does cash for access. He's the prime minister, and he thinks he's God. He does not do open rallies, and if he does, he certainly does not speak to everybody the way PR does at the end.
Well, as we get closer to the election, I'm going to invite him on Northern Perspective, fully expecting he's never going to come on Northern Perspective, but I'm going to invite him anyway to see if he has the gonads and the fortitude to actually speak with us.
For a factor in this, you personally, why do you think people don't like you?
Wow! Wow, that came out of left field.
Oh my God.
Okay, that shocked the crap out of me.
Wow!
Because, well, I was reading that rest of that National Post article that I referenced.
Why do you think people don't like you? Trudeau, you should be thinking about this question since Mercedes asked it of you back in December.
People are being very clear that they don't like you.
You should have been thinking about that question. Nobody likes you here.
But he's such a narcissist. He thinks everybody loves him, and we just don't understand his grand plan or whatever.
But I just love this question. Wow.
I spend a lot of time talking with Canadians right across the country. I spent time this morning with construction workers, talking about the work that they were doing, building new rental units for Canadians here in Toronto. I think there is a lot of frustration with the way the world is unfolding, and that frustration is being taken out on people in positions of power. I get that. That's part of my job. But my job is to stay focused on the solutions that people are going to need, and that's what we're doing.
But what about you? I mean, we're both old enough to have seen a number of prime ministers, and I have never seen, the sticker that I saw yesterday in downtown Toronto running through the city with F. Trudeau on the back of a pickup truck, flags with your name and the middle finger raised.
Yeah.
Why don't people like you?
This guy's just laying it at his feet. He's like, dude. And I wish he would have completed his statement. What he was starting to say is, we've both been around. We've both seen a number of prime ministers. I've never seen a prime minister with this much hate directed towards them. Not just the government, but you personally.
But I think you and I have had this discussion before that in my memory, I have never seen any prime minister with this much hate.
I have never seen flags manufactured and bumper stickers like this. It's on another level.
There is a level of polarization and toxicity that we see in a very visible way on social media and also in real life, as you point out. But most Canadians remain thoughtful and open and decent, and yes, frustrated and worried about their future. But I also know Canadians are good people who are willing to work together to build that future, and I'm part of that.
In the 2021 campaign, you used words talking about people, framing them as anti-vaxxer mobs. You talked about their racist and misogynist agenda. Do you regret using language like that, though?
Do you regret it?
Oh, yeah, of course, blah, blah, blah. Let's hear the answer.
Do you think that has added to how people think about you?
I regret that when I was talking about specific groups of racist, intolerant protesters, not everyone in the protest, but the ones who were shouting racial epithets and misogynistic slurs at my security detail and others, I'm going to call out intolerance and hateful language wherever it has. It is unfortunate that what I said was able to be that made a number of people feel I was talking about them. I have always been very, very careful to know people can make own decisions about whether they get vaccinated or not, that there's normal vaccine hesitancy out there in every population. And our job as a government is to try and encourage people to do the right things for public health. The fact that the polarization and the toxicity was so amplified deliberately with misinformation and disinformation is something that is a larger question than just, what I said on one particular day that was taken out of context.
Wow.
Excuse me? Taken out of context, and also, people can make their own choices. It's up to the government to, help them make good choices for public health. You guys literally force people to either get vaccinated or lose their livelihood.
So, Trudeau, is it misinformation? No, let's call it what it is. Is it disinformation? Because that's what he's saying it is. That people that worked for the government were actually fired from their jobs because they didn't get vaccinated? Is it disinformation that medical professionals were fired from their jobs because they didn't get vaccinated? Is it disinformation that truckers were not allowed to work because they didn't get vaccinated? Is it disinformation that you restricted the freedom of literally every single person in this country because they didn't get vaccinated? And you're trying to sit there and say that this was a choice and people took it out of context and it's everybody else's fault. Are you kidding me? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the gaslighting that is going on, not just from Justin Trudeau, but from the entire Liberal cabinet. And because the cabinet's doing it, all of the backbenchers are expected to follow suit.
Yeah, they're expected to toe the party line.
This is what is going on in this country.
Yeah, and none of them have the spine to stand up and say, no, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm standing up for my constituents.
Like, this is outrageous.
It's about whether Canadians are actually listening to each other and talking with each other and hearing each other and trying to remember that we are all in this together as citizens.
I want to come back to that idea of whether we're talking to each other, whether we're listening to each other. But on the healthcare issue, I was reading this week Jane Philpott's book, your former health minister. She has a new book coming out about the healthcare system. And in it, she says Canada's healthcare system is broken and that people are losing faith in it. Do you think Canada's healthcare system is broken?
I think one of the problems is people are proud of our healthcare system, but not sure that it's living up to its promise.
Is it broken?
I think there are parts of it that are absolutely broken.
Like what?
The fact that we still aren't able to measure outcomes appropriately. The fact that we're still not able to track.
Okay,
my goodness.
You had the opportunity to pick literally anything of the healthcare system and explain why it's broken, and you go to, well, we're not able to measure things. How about the fact that Cypher has an injury that occurred in December, and Cypher is not even going to get the surgery for it until February of next year? How about that? And how about Cypher is nothing compared to the people with really serious injuries out there?
Well, and how about part of the reason that we started this channel was because we couldn't afford the therapies for our son after they were delisted from OHIP.
So, you could have picked literally any part of the system. Wait times, doctor shortages, nursing shortages, bed shortages, equipment deficiencies. There's so many things. And you picked, well, we're not able to measure things.
Well, because that's not his fault, right? That's the hospital's fault for not giving stats.
There's a huge problem with lack of good data around health and comparable data across the province. That's why across the provinces, when we stepped up with historic health investments of $200 billion last year, the core condition was that all healthcare systems across this country need to have transparent, rigorous data collection so we can actually measure the things that we need to improve.
I think for people who are trying to interact with the healthcare system, they're not worried about data. They're worried about the fact that 6.5 million of them can't find a family doctor.
Well, I think that's a big piece of it as well. But if you're interacting with the healthcare system, you want to be able to interact in a way that is responding to you, that is seeing you. And better data, better health information is a piece of it. But part of our $200 million is directly towards increasing access to family doctors. That's one of our top priorities, and that's where we're signing deals with all the provinces on that.
It was interesting. I was speaking with the Premier of Manitoba, Wab Kinew, in February, just before you met with him, and he said that it's going to take more than money. He said that we're spending more money than ever in healthcare, and the outcomes are getting worse. This is something that we take great pride in as a nation.
I agree.
What is it going to take to get back to that pride?
And you know what? Matt Galloway just called the spade, and it's what we've been saying for months. When faced with a problem, what do the Liberals do? Throw money at it. They don't know how to do anything else.
Well, because Trudeau's a spoiled little rich kid. That's all he's known his entire life.
Right. Like, the problem isn't money in terms of the amount of doctors we have. The problem is, wait a minute, what is it? Oh, right, we don't have the doctors.
Well, and why don't we have the doctors? Because our medical schools are not pumping them out fast enough, or in numbers large enough, I should say. Because a lot of them are going down to the States where they can make a lot more money.
And all of the doctors that are coming into this country, we actually don't let them practice medicine. Like, it is so silly that we're even having this conversation. But this just goes to show how inept Justin Trudeau is.
So that, to Jane Philpott's point, people haven't lost faith and aren't losing faith in the system.
Well, first of all, getting a better understanding of what's working and what's not. We can't just throw money at the problem. I absolutely agree. That money needs to be spent in intelligent ways. And the best way to do that is to actually have accountability and transparency, not to the federal government by the provinces, but to citizens in the actual results pushing forward. And that's where the federal government is stepping in. We're not going to tell provinces how to deliver healthcare. The Constitution says they need to do that themselves. But we can make sure that they are measuring and demonstrating the improvements that Canadians deserve, including how many people are getting access to family doctors.
This guy literally just said, well, we threw $200 million at the problem of doctors. And then when challenged on that, he completely changes the story and does mental gymnastics. Like, well, you can't just throw money at a problem and hope it gets fixed.
Well, and this is the thing I've noticed about Trudeau, not just in interviews, but in general, is that when he gets enough pushback, he will flip and pander to the person giving him the pressure. So when Canadians are screaming that our immigration numbers are too high, instead of calling us all racist, he says, oh, now there's too many temporary students and foreign workers. Instead of, the interviewer wasn't taking the whole, oh, well, we gave you $200 million as an answer. So then he flipped and regurgitated what the interviewer wanted to hear. He's pandering.
Okay, so that was something, folks. And
that was infuriating. That was a dumpster fire.
Yeah, the whole thing was a dumpster fire, but
like, he just lies through his teeth.
But there's so much good to actually think about this interview, folks.
Well, because it exposes Trudeau for exactly what he is.
Well, but what it also shows is the Liberals are literally in panic mode. They are desperate for any win. They are throwing money everywhere. They are telling as many lies as people will listen. And it's not going to work. That's the thing to understand about all this, is it's not going to work. And the reason why I have confidence in that it's not going to work is because Trudeau's been trying to tell these same lies for 8 years. And it's only the fact that Pierre has literally won people over in the polls over a gradual period of time. But Trudeau I think he was just ignoring it, saying, oh, next week they'll drop, next week they'll drop, next week they'll drop. But they didn't. And I think his cabinet got really nervous over this past summer. And that led to the cabinet shuffle. You heard open calls for Trudeau to resign. And, Trudeau's, going around tapping people on the shoulder and making sure that they're toeing the party line. They changed out their communication strategy. And now they're resorting to the extreme personal tax that Trudeau said he would never ever do. The Liberals are in just pure desperation mode right now, and they don't know what to do. So what do they end up doing? They fall back to the only thing that they know how to do, which is tell lies and spend money. And neither is working, and people see it.
Well, Canadians are waking up now. I
Right.
mean, if Canadians weren't awake before, they're certainly going to be awake after this previous April 1st carbon tax hike.
Well, and here's the thing. The only way I think he gets the young people back is if housing costs come down, which unfortunately they're not going to unless a major recession hits, and then housing costs are going to be the least of our problems. Grocery costs come down, interest rates come down, and rent costs come down. And guess what, folks? Like Trudeau or hate him, if that all happens, that's good for Canada.
But I don't think he's going to be able to accomplish that. He's too married to his ideology.
Well, no, because all of the solutions that he's putting in aren't even solutions. That's the issue. So nothing that he does has a chance in fixing this country. And even these quote-unquote investments in these homes, he's not on track to complete any more homes this year than he did last year. So
over 1 million people are coming into the country this year, and they've done, 250,000 homes? The rule is you need one home for every 2 people that are coming in.
Right. And there's already a whole bunch of people that are homeless. And what are you going to do about them? This is the whole problem. But anyway, here we are, folks. You see Trudeau in desperation mode. He was really stuttering there for a little while because he was getting flustered. He didn't know what to do, and he had to flip narratives and play mental gymnastics. But this is why we are here. It's so we can call him out on this stuff, and you can share this with your friends. This is how so many of you tell us, I've converted people that voted Liberal. This is how.
That's right. Keep having those conversations. Don't be harsh, don't be judgmental, but just, hey, take a look at this. Or get to the bottom of why do you believe what you believe? And that's how you can find that people may be just misinformed about the right political party for them.
Well, and remember, folks, like we get so many comments, and we appreciate them from the bottom of our hearts, believe me, where people say, you've given me hope. Well, let me tell you, folks, it's you people are the ones that give Fox and I hope, because you are the ones that are coming to us and saying, I was able to convince people. I was able to convert my family. I converted 3 people.
Or I learned something myself.
So you are the ones that are actually going to make this happen. So you don't have to look to us. Look to yourselves, because you're the ones that are actually doing a lot of the hard work out there. So keep doing it, because it's working. And we know it's working because you see it in the polls. So keep it up, folks, because what you saw in this interview today and what you heard on this interview today is that the Liberals are going down in flames, and they know it.